Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm the Dr. Velazi, and just before we start, I'd like to invite you to check out our new and improved website, where you can find all of our latest content and events from the heart of the State of Israel. So please check it out and subscribe to ILTV.tv. And now, coming up in today's newscast. Iran has been ousted from the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women over its brutal crackdown on the women's rights protests. The Israel Defense Forces releasing new photos providing proof that terrorist organization Hamas has positioned its rocket launch sites in Gaza next to several schools. And celebrations across France as the defending World Cup champions defeated underdog Morocco 2-0 to reach Sunday's anticipated final against Argentina. Iran suffering a major diplomatic blow in the United Nations. This as the world body's leading forum on women's rights ejected the Islamic State for its brutal crackdown on protests, sparked by the death of Mahsa Amini in September. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz reports.
Iran was ousted from the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women for policies contrary to the rights of women and girls. The move was proposed by the United States after Tehran's brutal crackdown on protests, sparked by the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who was arrested by morality police enforcing the Islamic Republic's mandatory dress code and died in custody.
The Iranian government wants nothing more than to wiggle its way out of this vote, to use misinformation and procedural tricks to obscure the truth and avoid accountability. But today, I urge you to keep this simple. We have Iranian women and activists here in the room with us right now. Let's do right by them. Let's do right by women and girls around the world.
Israel supported the motion, and UN Ambassador Gilad Erdan compared Iran to history's worst regime.
The regime in Iran represents the embodiment of evil, just as Hitler's Nazi regime represented the embodiment of evil. The Iranian Ayatollahs are already responsible for the destruction of 4 Middle Eastern countries. They supply suicide drones for the murder of innocent Ukrainians. They attack the cyber infrastructure of Albania. They murder innocent Kurds in Iraq. They endanger global maritime trade routes. And they publicly threaten another member states of the UN with annihilation.
The 54-member UN Economic and Social Council adopted the resolution to remove Iran for the remainder of its 2022-2026 term. 29 voted in favor, 8 against, and there were 16 abstentions. The U.S. ambassador spoke of the vote's meaning.
So today we came together at the United Nations and stood with Iranian women, Iranian girls, and the Iranian people. Following the death of Mahsa Amini, tens of thousands of Iranians said, enough is enough. The people have taken to the streets and made their voices heard. They're standing for women, for life, and for freedom. The Iranian government has responded with brutality and with violence.
Meanwhile, in Iran, a second public hanging in less than a week, this time of a man convicted of killing 2 members of the security forces during the protests. Amnesty International says authorities are seeking the death penalty for at least 21 people in what it called sham trials. The demonstrations have turned into a popular revolt by furious Iranians from all layers of society, posing one of the most significant legitimacy challenges to the Shiite clerical elite since the 1979 Islamic Revolution.
And so joining us now with more on the UN vote and its implications is Hillel Neuer, Executive Director of United Nations Watch. Thank you for joining us. Great to have you here in the studio.
My pleasure.
So what are the implications of this historic vote, Iran being ousted from the UN's women's rights group?
Look, this has never happened before. So we're looking at something that is historic in the entire history of the United Nations. A member state has never before been removed from the UN Women's Rights Commission. It's a major slap in the face for the Islamic regime, for the Ayatollah Khamenei, the dictator. The world has said, you are shameless. There is a cry in Iran of the people. They say, Bisharaf, you are shameless. You have no honor. You have no dignity. You have no conscience. You have no morals. You are shameless. Bisharaf. That is what the world yesterday, for the first time at the United Nations, said to Khamenei, said to the Islamic regime, said to the murderous mullahs. And it's a very important message and a signal that was sent from the world. It gives great strength. There were celebrations in the town where Mahsa Amini, the young woman who was beaten and killed while in police custody, there were fireworks immediately after the vote. So a very important message was sent. I want to be clear, there is no concrete action that happened yesterday that will save the people in Iran who are being beaten, blinded, tortured, raped, killed by the regime. This doesn't help them do that, but it is the beginning. We see this as the beginning of the world mobilizing and sending the right message for maybe the first time.
So before we look ahead, I do want to take a step back. You know, your organization was the first to sort of break the story about Iran joining the council in the first place. Can you give us maybe a little bit of a behind the scenes? What happened, you know, from that moment until the vote to oust Iran?
Look, the election that happened last year, April 20th, 2021, was an abomination. It was a travesty. It should never have happened. Sadly, at the United Nations, there is something rotten in the culture of the United Nations. There is a kind of moral bankruptcy, a moral corruption, where it's a regular thing that the worst dictatorships get elected. They seek election for reasons of propaganda, to protect their records of abuse. They seek election to the world's highest human rights bodies, and very often they win. That's what happened in April 2021. Iran was elected with 43 out of 54 votes. Only 11 didn't vote for them. We know it was a secret ballot. So we don't know which countries at the time voted for Iran, but at least four EU and Western countries voted for Iran. That's the cynical back and forth where diplomats go along to get along at the UN. UN Watch was the first organization to break the story. There was silence. No news agency reported it. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the largest, wealthiest NGOs, they were silent. We were not silent. We exposed it and we said, this is outrageous. It has to be reversed. We created a firestorm in parliaments in Europe, in Canada, in the United States. We demanded to know who voted for the Islamic Republic. Reveal your secret ballots. They didn't want to reveal the ballot. The Canadian ambassador, I salute him, Bob Ray, he immediately said, we did not vote for Iran. And yesterday he gave the most powerful rejoinder to those who argued that they should not be removed. He said, can it really be that a country can do whatever it wants against women and yet have no consequences for them being on a women's rights commission? And, you know, we campaigned throughout the past year and a half. We had caricatures in Geneva, Switzerland, the headquarters of the UN human rights system. We had an entire train of a tram plastered with the words, remove, expel Iran from the Women's Rights Commission. And we had tweets and videos and a website. And we had a diplomatic campaign. And there were other activists in Geneva and New York who pressed it. And it was a worldwide effort. People like Nazanin Afshinjam, people like Nazanin Boniadi, Masih Alinejad, the hero of the women's rights movement, she said from the beginning, this is surreal. And it took, sadly, the death of Mahsa Amini, hundreds of other protesters, women being shot in the back for this to happen. And finally, we had justice yesterday.
Now, this is the first time, as you mentioned, that any country has been ejected, you know, from a council. Could this perhaps mark a change within the UN?
We hope so. But I need to be realistic. There is a long-standing practice where at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, where I'm based, China, Cuba, Venezuela, Eritrea, Libya, Qatar, they sit on the Human Rights Council. Only twice in the history of the past 2 decades were evil dictatorships removed. In both cases, campaigns that we spearheaded. Gaddafi in 2011, Vladimir Putin this year in April. Those are the exceptions. The rule is the dictatorships seek election, and our democracies do very little to stop them. In rare occasions, they do intervene, and they can stop them. And we see today that Vladimir Putin was removed. The U.S. took action. Yesterday, Iran was removed because the U.S. took action. But it's rare. So unfortunately, to be realistic, I